Detective Explainer here. Today, I'm going to explain a drama romance film called Muse. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Lee Jeok-yo sits by his table, and he opens up letters commending him for the books he's written. Later that night, he gets ready for bed before staring blankly at his wall, contemplating his life. The next day, Lee's student, Seo Ji-woo, is reading some lines from his book in front of an audience. Lee picks him up afterwards, and the two head home. There, they are surprised to find Han Eun-gyo sleeping on a chair. They ask her who she is and how she got there. And she explains that there was a ladder by the fence and that she's always wanted to sit in a chair like that. After a brief conversation, she eventually leaves. Inside the house, Seo prepares food for him and Lee so they can have lunch together. He asks Lee if the soup is too salty, but Lee just ignores him and walks away. Later, Seo sits with Lee. He mentions Eun-gyo, saying that she was looking for a part-time job even though she's still in high school. When Seo adds that she does housework all the time, Lee instructs him to tell Eun-gyo to come this Saturday. That Saturday, Eun-gyo is at Lee's home. She's cleaning the house as Lee watches her closely. While cleaning his study, she accidentally hits a pile of books. Lee hears this and helps fix the mess. Eun-gyo apologizes for this, but he reassures her that it's fine before helping her out with the rest of the chores. Later, Eun-gyo cleans some windows and starts telling Lee about herself. Lee just listens, staring in awe while she speaks. Afterwards, Eun-gyo notices how stumpy Lee's pencils are and offers to sharpen them, but he tells her not to, saying that sharp pencils are woeful. Eun-gyo then asks him about the poetry behind sharp pencils. Lee explains why sharp pencils are sad, telling Eun-gyo that the sounds of clattering pencils remind him of crying, making sharp pencils sound like tears. Eun-gyo curiously listens as he then tells her that whenever she asks to sharpen the pencils, it's like she's asking him to wipe away her tears. Eun-gyo gently nods as she begins to understand what he means before leaving for home. The next day, Eun-gyo is in class while she ponders over what Lee told her. She then goes to Lee's house in the middle of a rainy night, calling him from outside, so he can let her in. Inside the kitchen, Eun-gyo asks him if she could stay the night because she can't go home. He then asks her to show her face, but she hides it instead. Approaching her, Lee checks her cheek, only to find a bruise there. Concerned, he asks who did that to her, and Eun-gyo currently responds that her mother did it. She does that to Eun-gyo sometimes, so she usually goes to a friend's house. After hearing this, Lee tells her to get changed. In his room, Lee lends Eun-gyo some of his clothes then dries her clothes with a hairdryer. As Eun-gyo watches from his bed, she tells Lee that she remembered one of his poems in her last exam. Lee curiously listens while continuing to dry her clothes. Eun-gyo starts talking about her mother, telling him that pencils remind her of her mom since she used to use her pencil knife to shave her heels. While she's speaking, Lee gives her some quick glances as she slowly spreads her legs. When she ends her story, Eun-gyo asks Lee if he likes her feet. This surprises the old man, making him drop her blouse. Eun-gyo playfully laughs at this, and with that, they go to bed. In the morning, Lee wakes up and is surprised to find Eun-gyo lying down near his waist. Flustered, he checks on her again and notices a tattoo on her chest. He continues to stare at the tattoo until Seo arrives. Hearing the gate open, Lee quickly runs out to his study as Seo opens the front door. Walking inside, Seo notices Eun-gyo's uniform on a hanger and is surprised to see her coming out of Lee's room. He then walks towards the study and looks through the window, where he sees that Lee's flustered. Later, Eun-gyo makes breakfast for all of them and offers Seo a pickle. Seo then tells Eun-gyo that Lee doesn't like bread, but she ignores him and insists on giving him some. In the study, Eun-gyo happily gives Lee a sandwich, surprising him. He then takes it and praises Eun-gyo before she leaves to get coffee, teasing Seo on her way out. Now alone with Lee, Seo approaches him to remind him that Eun-gyo's a high school student. Lee says he's aware of this then asks what's wrong, but Seo just sits and says nothing. Afterwards, Lee asks Eun-gyo about her tattoo, but she clarifies that it's just henna. Overhearing this, Seo throws the rest of his coffee away in disgust. Later, in the woods, the three are going for a hike when Seo suddenly tells Eun-gyo that she can stop going to Lee's house. Eun-gyo just shrugs him off, telling him that she's now going there twice a week. Surprised, Seo could only watch while Eun-gyo catches up to Lee, holding his arm as they walk. Shortly after, they move to a cliff. Eun-gyo checks herself out through her mirror before Seo roughly taps her shoulder, making her drop her mirror. Upset, the girl lashes out at him, asserting that the mirror was a gift from her mother. He tries calming her down, but Yoon Jae-yo refuses to listen. Noticing this, Lee starts climbing down the cliff to get Yoon Jae-yo's mirror. Despite Yoon Jae-yo and Seo's concern and attempts to stop him, he still goes on, eventually retrieving the mirror. Once he's back, Lee returns Yoon Jae-yo's mirror to her, making her embrace him tightly while later that afternoon, Eun-gyu runs to Lee's home to tell him that she'll give him henna. Though Lee tries to refuse at first, he gives in to Eun-gyu's persuasions and the two head inside his house. Lee nervously lies on Eun-gyu's lap as she starts putting the henna on him. When she tells him to close his eyes, Lee soon starts zoning out, imagining himself with Eun-gyu. In his imagination, he's moving closer to her, gently touching her thighs before she runs away. Standing up, Lee stares at himself from the window and is stunned to see a younger version of himself. He then runs after Eun-gyu, smiling while chasing after her. The two then head back to the house, slowly undressing each other as they enjoy their moment. They're smiling the whole time, and Lee even recites a poem dedicated to her. Unfortunately, his dream comes to an end when Yoon Jae-yo wakes him up to excitedly show him his new tattoo. Later, Lee is in his study, passionately writing a poem for Yoon Jae-yo as he imagines the two of them together. In his home, a frustrated Seo keeps trying to write a poem, but he ends up deleting it from his computer. He then calls Yoon Jae-yo, asking her to buy him some medicine. But when she arrives, Seo starts screaming at her, demanding to know what she's doing to Lee and asserting that he's a noble person. He keeps asking her if she knows what Lee means to him, but Eun-gyo doesn't even understand what he's getting at. Confused and angry, Eun-gyo asks him what she did wrong before cursing him, snapping at him to screw off. Insulted, Seo grabs Eun-gyo, pulling at her blouse and blaming her mirror for the way Lee had risked himself just to get her to stop crying. When he demands to know what's so special about it, Eun-gyo stresses that it was a gift from her mother, and so rudely asks if she thinks it's filled with her love. Though he's still furious, he notices blood on Eun-gyo's blouse. This calms him down, and he goes to get some napkins for her. Yoon Jae-yo mentions that she'd forgotten Seo was an engineering major, surprising him. She explains that Lee told her about how he met Seo and how it took him 10 years to realize that not all stars are the same. As Seo listens in shock, he recalls the day he met Lee in his class during his discussion about stars. She adds that he told her about the time Lee went to prison, where he learned to fix cars. When Seo asks if Lee's ever talked about him, Yoon Jae-yo says she doesn't know before asking if she could borrow The Heart, which is Seo's book. The next day, Yoon Jae-yo and Seo are in Lee's study. Seo asks Eun-gyo if she's read The Heart yet while closely watching her fix the room. Eun-gyo says that she hasn't because she's busy, to which Seo states that she shouldn't read it. When Eun-gyo starts moving a table, Seo quickly stops her, but she insists on moving it and mentions that Lee has been writing. While this surprises Seo, he still tries to stop Eun-gyo from moving the table, asserting that it's been there for the longest time. Insistent, Eun-gyo tries to stop Seo by sitting on the table. The two play around for a bit, pushing each other off before they knock the table over. Eun-gyo then hears Lee arriving, making her rush upstairs to greet him. Left alone, Seo fixes the table and opens it, finding Lee's poem for Yoon Jae-yo. When Yoon Jae-yo and Lee arrive in the study, Lee instructs Yoon Jae-yo to return the table, disappointing her. Seo then gives Lee his schedule, mentioning that he's going to a restaurant to meet with the literary museum officials on Monday. Yoon Jae-yo tells Lee that she wants to come, making Seo sneer in disapproval. However, Lee allows her to go, surprising Seo. With that, Yoon Jae-yo declares that she's read The Heart. They talk about Seo's book for a while, with Lee explaining what he thinks of it. On Monday, Lee has his dinner with the officials. One of the officials named Mr. Park asks about the girl in Lee's poem, Camilla, and he tells them that she was 17. When they start bringing up the literature museum, Lee suddenly stands up, much to everyone's surprise. As the group asks why he's in a hurry, Lee answers by showing the henna Yoon Jae-yo drew on him. Then, he tells them that they have to wait until he's dead if they want to build the literary museum. With that, he leaves for Yoon Jae-yo while the museum officials wonder why Seo keeps following Lee around. At the bus stop, Lee picks up Yoon Jae-yo, who's ecstatic to see him. They then drive off to a restaurant to eat. There, the two joke around and enjoy their time together. Meanwhile, in Lee's study, Seo reads Lee's poem for Eun-gyo again. After reading, he leans back and sighs heavily as he closes his eyes in bewilderment. He then returns the poem to Lee's table, gently closing it before he opens it again. Seo angrily stares at Eun-gyo's name, and this time he slams it shut. Later that night, Lee is working on his truck when Mr. Park suddenly arrives. He tells him that they'll name the museum the Camellia Memorial Hall and that they want to display Lee's manuscript there. Lee agrees to this before he and Mr. Park talk about Seo's success as a writer. Mr. Park then tells Lee about Seo's latest short story. When Lee asks what the title is, he is surprised to discover that it's called Eun-gyo. After hearing this, Lee rushes to his study and looks for his poem about Eun-gyo. When he finds it on his table, Lee drives to a bookstore where he finds Seo's short story. He holds the book as he stares at it in shock. The next day, Seo meets with Lee in his home. Inside, Seo makes a cup of tea for Lee, but he refuses it, saying that Seo might have poisoned it. Lee then confronts Seo about what he did, and Seo tries reasoning that he couldn't just let Lee's poem about Eun-gyo waste away at his table. Had to let the world know about it. This only angers Lee, and he calls Seo a thief, but Seo retorts that Lee was the one who made him the way he is when Lee secretly wrote the heart for him. In retaliation, Lee claims that he considered it Seo's salary. Seo may not have had talent, but he kept him company, so Lee wrote it for him as a gift. Now, Seo is going on a tirade about how he doesn't know who he is anymore, if he's himself or Lee's mask. Lee tries to stop him, but Seo remains deep in his emotions, and he asks what makes his poem for Eun-gyo different from the heart. Then, he tells Lee that he can't publish it because his relationship with Yoon Jae-il would be scandalous. Finally, Lee bursts out in anger, grabbing Seo and berating him over how worthless he is and calling him a thief. Lee then hits him in the head, threatening him continuously and cursing at him. Suddenly, Seo stares to the side, seeing Yoon Jae-il arrive and witness their argument. Afraid, Yoon Jae-il runs away from the two, leaving the house as tears fall from Seo's eyes. Lee then sits down, sighing as he thinks about what just happened. Later that night, Yoon Jae-il returns to Lee's house. She tries to enter through the front door. But it's locked, making her move to the window. From there, she starts calling out to Lee, telling him that she can't focus and that she's hurting inside. Lee just listens while Eun-gyo pleads for him. Losing hope, Eun-gyo picks up a copy of the story about her on Lee's porch and leaves with it. The next day, Seo walks home and suddenly sees Eun-gyo waiting by his door, holding a copy of his short story. He then asks Eun-gyo if she had read it, but she only scolds him for stealing the story. Seo apologizes for this, and Eun-gyo asks how he found out about Lee's henna. He tells her that he told him about it, but Eun-gyo isn't satisfied, scolding him again for not keeping secrets with Lee. Seo then tells her that Lee is a father figure to him and that he trusts him with everything. After this, the two go to Seo's car and continue to talk. Suddenly, Seo caresses her hair and starts kissing her, soon making his way to her neck. But when she asks him why he's doing this, he stops. Seo admits that he's lonely, and he pulls away, leaning back to his seat. Disgusted, Yoon-gi looks at him before leaving the car to head home. After that, Seo meets with a museum official over dinner, and they wait for the announcement of the annual literary award winner. The museum official then answers his phone and informs Seo that he won the award for his story on Eun-gyo. Seo doesn't believe it first, and he eventually smiles, still in disbelief. The museum official then asks him if Lee has read the story. Lying, Seo claims that Lee did read it and that it reminded him of Seo. The next day, Seo is waiting for the awarding ceremony to begin when the museum official informs him that Lee is there to watch. Surprised, Seo gasps as he sees Lee enter the awarding before taking his seat. After Seo receives the award, the host calls Lee to the stage for a speech about Seo's award. Lee then gives his speech, commending his pupil. One snowy day, Lee cleans some of his windows before he starts imagining Eun-gyo. He stares at her as she giggles in the snow, but he stays inside, choosing to look longingly at her instead. Later, while Lee is cutting some seaweed strips, Eun-gyo suddenly arrives and greets him happy birthday. She even has a cake and a present with her. Though Lee's just staring at her sadly through the window, Eun-gyo ignores this and tells him that his windows are dirty. She then notices that Lee is unhappy to see her, but he tells her that he's glad she came. After he opens the door for her, she happily walks in. Lee's cooking at a barbecue outside, and Eun-gyo's preparing his cake when Seo arrives. He greets Lee and gives him a gift. Before he leaves, Seo informs Eun-gyo that Lee is diabetic, then starts walking away. Lee stops him and invites him to stay for a drink, which Seo accepts. Inside, the two sit awkwardly together while Eun-gyo prepares the food. When she arrives, she then asks Lee about the history of wine, and Lee answers her. So asks why she doesn't ask him any questions, but Eun-gyo laughs it off, telling him that he doesn't have good answers and that he's too loose like all engineering majors are. As they keep talking, Seo starts musing about how different his life is now that he's become a national writer. Critics used to hate him back then, but now, they all love him just because he won an award. He then proclaims that he is no longer a mask and that he really just wants to succeed. Clearly drunk, Seo continues to ramble on before Lee calls it a night, leaving Seo downstairs, who's now thanking Lee for making him who he is. Now in his room, Eun-gyo greets Lee one more time before walking out. However, Lee stops her and suddenly embraces her, and they hold each other tightly. After their embrace, Lee sits down on his bed before Eun-gyo kisses him on his forehead and leaves. Lee bids her goodnight one last time then goes to sleep. However, Eun-gyo walks back inside and sneaks into Lee's study. In the middle of the night, Lee wakes up and walks downstairs. Seeing Eun-gyo's shoes, Lee makes his way to his study, where he finds Eun-gyo and Seo laughing with each other. He then moves outside to spy on them from a window and catches a glimpse of them kissing. Lee moves deeper into his house, grabbing a ladder nearby to watch the two from another window. After climbing up, Lee is in disbelief when he sees Eun-gyo and Seo hooking up. Lee climbs down from the ladder, leaving the two to finish with their business. Afterwards, Lee sits in his car, saddened by what he had just witnessed. He waits for Eun-gyo to leave before working on his truck again. The next day, Seo rushes to his car and finds that one of his tires is flat. He then borrows Lee's truck, making Lee jump from the bed when he hears the engine start. On the road, Seo is driving when he suddenly loses control of the steering wheel, making the truck crash. Afterwards, he heads to the mechanic to have it fixed. In the repair shop, the mechanic tells him that the engine's been intentionally loosened and so deduces that whoever did it had killing intent. With a look of realization, he heads back to Lee's house after the car was fixed. As he drives, Seo angrily thinks about what he'll tell Lee when he sees him, and he wonders why he would ever do such a thing. Meanwhile, back at Lee's house, he starts burning his poem about Eun-gyo, looking lonely as he throws the papers into a fire. Still on the road, Seo remains deep in thought as he tries to overtake a car in front of him. Annoyed, Seo speeds up, but another car comes crashing into his. The impact makes the car fall off the road, leaving Seo bloodied inside. While this is happening, Eun-gyo is at school, and she checks on her phone's message. To her horror, Lee is telling her that he had killed Seo. Eun-gyo then runs out of class and rides a bus to Lee's house. On her way there, she sees a police car and a crane pulling out Seo's car, leaving her helpless inside the bus as she grieves. The next day, in a library, Eun-gyo reads Seo's award-winning story again, making her suck in tears before heading back to Lee's home. When she arrives, she finds spoiled food and liquor on the table then moves to Lee's room. There, she finds him in bed, smelling like liquor. Eun-gyo starts talking to Lee, stammering at first before lying down beside him. She tells him how she understands that Lee wrote Seo's story and how she's grateful that he made her so pretty there. Lee just lies down with his eyes closed as Eun-gyo continues, telling him that she's an idiot for not knowing how much Lee loved her. After pouring her heart to him, Eun-gyo gets up, leaves a bouquet for Lee, then bids him her last goodbye. After Eun-gyo closes the door, Lee's eyes are filled with tears as he bids Eun-gyo goodbye for the final time. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.